Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we share heartwarming stories that touch the soul and inspire change. In today's story, we journey through the incredible life of a dedicated police officer, Will Smith, who made a life-altering decision that would challenge society's expectations and redefine the meaning of family. When Will responded to a distress call, he found 6 black girls, abandoned and neglected due to their mother's alcoholism. Rather than watch them get separated and lost in the foster care system, Will, a single white man, took them in as his own. As we follow Will and his adopted daughters through their trials and triumphs, you'll witness how love, stability, and family transcend race and hardship. The girls grow into remarkable women, and years later, they return his love by creating something extraordinary in his honor. It's a story of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. If stories of love overcoming adversity inspire you, be sure to leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Hopeful Horizon for more touching stories that stay with you long after they're told. It was a quiet evening when Officer Will Smith received a call that would alter the course of his life forever. His squad car moved swiftly through the darkened streets, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the cracked windows of the run-down neighborhood. Dispatch had informed him of a possible case of child neglect. 6 little girls living in deplorable conditions. The mother, a known alcoholic, had become unreliable, and the neighbors had grown concerned. When Will arrived at the scene, the small house looked broken, windows boarded up, weeds growing tall in the yard, and the air of abandonment hanging around it. As he walked up the creaky wooden steps, he could hear faint voices from inside, young voices, laughing, playing. For a moment, he felt a pang in his chest. What would he find behind that door? After knocking twice with no answer, Will entered the home with his partner. The stench hit him first, stale air, rotting food, and neglect. He found the mother sprawled on the couch, passed out, surrounded by empty bottles. His heart sank further when he noticed the 6 little girls sitting on the floor, their eyes wide with curiosity, staring at the police officers as if they were used to this intrusion. "Hey there," Will said softly, kneeling to meet them at eye level. "I'm Officer Smith. Are you all okay?" The girls looked at each other, unsure. The eldest, probably no older than 12, finally spoke. "We're fine. Mom's just sleeping again." Will exchanged a glance with his partner. They both knew this was more than just a temporary issue. The children were thin, their clothes dirty, and it was clear they hadn't been properly cared for in a long time. His heart broke as he looked at their innocent faces, thinking about what kind of life they must have lived. These girls, abandoned in every sense, deserved so much more. Over the next few hours, Child Protective Services, CPS, arrived, and the reality set in. The girls were going to be separated, possibly placed in different foster homes, their bond torn apart by a system that was meant to protect them, but often didn't. Will felt an overwhelming urge to help. His protective instinct surged as he watched them huddle together, clinging to each other, afraid of what was to come. As CPS workers started preparing to take the girls, Will knew he couldn't let this happen. The thought of these sisters being split up, thrown into an uncertain future, gnawed at him. He didn't know where the idea came from, but it took root fast. "Wait," Will said suddenly, stepping forward. His partner and the CPS workers looked at him in surprise. "Don't separate them. I'll take them." There was a stunned silence. Will, a single white man with no children, was offering to adopt 6 black girls. It sounded crazy, even to him. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was keeping them together, giving them a chance at a real family, something stable. The social worker hesitated. "Are you sure, Officer Smith?" "This is a huge commitment." Will nodded. "I'm sure." The process wasn't easy. The bureaucracy was thick, and the questions were endless. But Will's resolve never wavered. He visited the girls often, ensuring they knew he wasn't giving up on them. Finally, after months of waiting, the adoption went through, and the 6 girls came home with him. His house, once quiet and orderly, became chaotic and full of life. The girls were loud, messy, and occasionally difficult to manage, but they were also full of joy. Will had to learn how to braid hair, understand the complexities of raising black girls in a society that often treated them unfairly, and navigate conversations about race, identity, and belonging. He faced criticism, both subtle and overt, from people who couldn't understand why a white man would adopt 6 black girls. Some questioned his motives, others outright disapproved. But for Will, none of that mattered. All he cared about was giving these girls the life they deserved, full of love, stability, and hope for the future. Over time, they bonded in ways Will had never imagined. The girls, Jasmine, Tiana, Zuri, Aaliyah, Kiana, and Nia, brought him joy he didn't know he was missing. They became his world, and he became theirs. Together, they forged a family built not on blood, but on love and determination. The first year was the hardest. Will had gone from a quiet, solitary life to one filled with 6 daughters, each with their own personalities, challenges, and needs. He wasn't just learning how to be a father, he was learning how to be a father to 6 black girls who had lived through trauma and neglect. Jasmine, the eldest, was protective of her younger sisters. She had been their caretaker for so long that she struggled to let Will in. She was wary, always keeping her guard up, afraid that one day he might leave them just like their mother had. Tiana, the second eldest, was the rebel. She acted out often, testing Will's patience with her defiance, pushing him away just to see if he would come back. Zuri, the middle child, was quiet and withdrawn, spending hours alone in her room with her books, unsure of where she fit in this new life. Aaliyah, Kiana, and Nia, the youngest, were more trusting. They quickly began calling Will Dad, adapting to their new life with an ease that sometimes made the older girls jealous. Will, determined to give them all the attention they needed, worked hard to balance his time, learning to listen and understand their individual struggles. Will struggled too. He was a cop, not a social worker or a therapist, but he knew he had to be both for these girls. He attended parenting classes, read books on transracial adoption, and sought advice from colleagues and friends who had adopted children. The most important lesson he learned was that love alone wasn't enough. He needed to understand their experiences, their fears, their history, and how the world saw them. Raising them in a predominantly white neighborhood presented its own set of challenges. Strangers would stare at them in public, sometimes making rude comments or assumptions. Will had to confront his own privilege, realizing that while he could walk through life unscathed by racial bias, his daughters would not have the same experience. At night, when the house finally quieted down, Will often found himself staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the responsibility he had taken on. But every morning, when he saw his girls' faces and heard their laughter, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. As the girls grew older, the outside world became more of a challenge. Will knew that he couldn't protect them from everything, especially not from the racial prejudice they would inevitably face. It started with small incidents, Jasmine being followed around a store, Zuri being questioned about where she lived when she visited a friend's house, and Tiana getting into fights at school with kids who teased her about having a white dad. Will tried to shield them from the worst of it, but he knew he couldn't be everywhere at once. He encouraged open conversations at home, wanting them to feel safe, expressing their fears and frustrations. They would sit around the dinner table, sometimes for hours, talking about race, identity, and what it meant to navigate the world as young black women. The dinner table conversations often left Will feeling helpless, but determined. He couldn't change the world overnight, but he could arm his daughters with the confidence and resilience they needed to face it. Jasmine, now a teenager, had grown into a strong-willed and outspoken young woman. But with her growing independence came new struggles. One evening, she came home visibly upset. After a few probing questions, she finally confided in Will that her history teacher had made a racially insensitive comment, dismissing the experiences of black people throughout history. I raised my hand and tried to explain, but he cut me off and said I was being too emotional about it, Jasmine said, her voice trembling with frustration. And no one stood up for me. No one. Not even my friends. Will clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted to march down to the school and give the teacher a piece of his mind, but he knew that would embarrass Jasmine and might make things worse for her. Instead, he pulled her close and said, "I'm proud of you for speaking up. It's hard, but what you did takes courage. You keep standing up for what's right, no matter who tries to silence you, and I'll always have your back." Jasmine wiped her eyes and nodded. She knew her father's love was steadfast, but the weight of the world outside their home felt heavier each day. For Tiana, the rebellious streak never really faded. As she moved through her teenage years, she often clashed with authority. She once got into trouble for skipping class to attend a protest for racial justice. Will wasn't angry. How could he be? He admired her passion, but he also worried for her safety. The world didn't always take kindly to black girls who refused to conform, and he knew she would face harsher consequences than her white peers. "I can't sit by and do nothing, Dad," Tiana argued one evening after she'd been suspended from school for her protest activities. "You taught us to stand up for what's right, but they treat me like I'm a criminal for it." Will sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "I'm not telling you to stop fighting for what's right, Tiana. I'm just saying, be careful. The world doesn't play fair, especially for girls like you. I just don't want to see you get hurt." Tiana softened, her defiance fading momentarily. "I know, Dad, but I can't let fear stop me." Zuri, still the quiet one, found her outlet in writing. She would spend hours typing away on her laptop, creating stories that reflected her feelings of displacement and longing for understanding. Will often found her curled up in the corner of the couch, lost in her own world of words. "I'm going to be a writer one day," Zuri announced one night at dinner, a rare occasion when she shared her thoughts. "I'm going to tell our story, so people know what it's like to be us." Will smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "I have no doubt that you will, and when you publish that first book, I'll be the first in line to buy a copy." As the years passed, Will's daughters continued to grow into remarkable young women, each facing their own battles, but never losing the sense of family and love that Will had worked so hard to cultivate. But as they thrived, Will's health began to falter. It started with small things that Will could easily brush off: misplacing his keys, feeling unusually tired after a day at work, or sometimes losing track of conversations. At first, he blamed it on age. Raising 6 daughters, all of whom had grown into strong, independent women, was no small feat, and it seemed natural that he would be a little worn out. But when the dizzy spells started, and then the chest pains, he knew something wasn't right. The moments of discomfort were brief, passing before he had time to really worry about them, but they left an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach. He told himself he could handle it, that it wasn't worth troubling his daughters. They were busy with their own lives now, all of them successful and deeply immersed in their careers. Still, the concern in their eyes whenever they visited told him they could sense something was off. It wasn't long before Jasmine, the eldest, confronted him. "Dad," she said one evening, after he had fumbled with his fork at dinner, "I know you don't want to talk about it, but we've all noticed. You're not yourself lately." Will smiled softly, trying to brush it off. "I'm fine, Jazzy. Just getting old, that's all." But Jasmine's expression didn't waver. She had inherited her father's stubbornness, and she wasn't about to let this go. "No, Dad, this is more than just getting old. You need to see a doctor." Tiana, who had been listening quietly, nodded in agreement. "She's right, Dad. Please, just go in for a checkup. It's probably nothing, but it's better to be sure." Despite his protests, the girls eventually convinced him to schedule an appointment. The look of concern on all 6 of their faces had worn down his defenses. And so, a few days later, Will found himself sitting in a cold, sterile doctor's office, waiting for the results of a series of tests he hadn't expected to need. The news hit him harder than he'd anticipated. "You have a heart condition," the doctor explained, his voice calm but firm. "It's serious. And it's not something that can be managed with just lifestyle changes. You're going to need surgery." Will sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. Surgery? He'd never been one to rely on hospitals or medications. He was the one who took care of others, not the other way around. But now, his body was betraying him, and the thought of being vulnerable, of needing help, unsettled him deeply. The hardest part was telling his daughters. They had always seen him as their protector, the man who had taken them in when the world had turned its back on them. Now, he was the one in need of care. That night, after gathering his strength, Will sat them down in the living room, his heart heavy with the weight of the news. "I've got something to tell you," he began, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "I'm going to need surgery. It's my heart." The room fell silent as his words sank in. For a moment, no one spoke. Jasmine, always the composed one, was the first to break the silence. "What kind of surgery, Dad?" she asked, her voice calm but strained with emotion. Will explained the situation as best he could, keeping the details simple. He didn't want to worry them more than necessary, but there was no hiding the seriousness of the condition. "We're going to get through this," Tiana said, her tone filled with determination. "You're not alone, Dad. We're all here for you." And she meant it. From that moment on, the sisters rallied around him, just as he had always done for them. They took turns accompanying him to doctor's appointments, managing his medications, and making sure he wasn't overexerting himself. Jasmine, with her background in law, took charge of organizing the legal documents related to his medical care. Tiana, who had become a fierce activist, balanced her busy schedule to help with his physical therapy. Zuri, now a successful author, spent long evenings by his side, reading him drafts of her newest books. The younger girls, all thriving in their respective fields, made time to be there as well, dropping everything when their father needed them. Will hated the thought of being a burden. He had always prided himself on being self-reliant, on never asking for help. But seeing the way his daughters cared for him filled his heart with something he hadn't expected. Pride, yes, but also a deep sense of contentment. These 6 women, who had once been abandoned and unwanted, had grown into strong, compassionate individuals. They were a reflection of everything he had worked for, a testament to the love and dedication he had poured into their lives. One evening, as Jasmine was helping him organize some medical bills, Will looked at her with a soft smile. "I don't deserve all this," he said quietly. Jasmine glanced up from the papers, her eyes filled with love. "Yes, you do, Dad. You've done more for us than we could ever repay. This is just our way of giving back." And though Will still struggled with the idea of being cared for, he knew deep down that she was right. They were strong because of him, and now they were showing him just how much they had learned from his example. But as much as the sisters cared for him in these day-to-day ways, they knew it wasn't enough. Will had always been larger than life to them, a man who had given them everything, despite the challenges of raising 6 black daughters as a single white father in a racially divided world. They wanted to honor him in a bigger way, something that would immortalize the love and sacrifices he had made for them. One night, as the sisters sat together discussing their father's health, the idea struck them. It was simple, yet profound. A foundation in his name, one that would help foster children just like them. It would be a way to ensure that Will's legacy lived on, that his love and dedication to them would continue to impact future generations. As they began laying the groundwork for the William Smith Foundation, their hearts swelled with pride. They knew that this was the right way to honor the man who had given them everything. Through the foundation, they would give back to the world, just as Will had given to them. And though they kept their plans a secret, they knew that when the time came, their father would be proud of what they had created in his name. One evening, the 6 sisters gathered in the living room of Jasmine's house, their faces serious but determined. The atmosphere was different from their usual family get-togethers. There was no light banter, no playful teasing or laughter. Tonight was about something bigger, something that had been brewing in their hearts for months. Jasmine, the eldest and the natural leader of the group, sat at the head of the room, her expression focused. She looked at each of her sisters, feeling the weight of the moment. "We've been talking," she began, her voice steady but carrying a deep sense of purpose. "Dad gave us everything. He sacrificed his whole life for us. And now, it's time we give back." The other 5 sisters nodded in agreement. They had all felt it, the growing need to do something more for their father, something that could honor everything he had done for them. He had adopted them when no one else wanted them, raised them with love and care, and ensured that they had the opportunities they needed to succeed in life. Now that they were adults with their own successful careers, it was time to return the favor in a way that would make him proud. Tiana, the second oldest and always one to speak her mind, leaned forward. "Dad never asks for anything," she said, her voice passionate. "But that's exactly why we need to do this. We want to create something in his name, something that reflects what he did for us, but also something that can help other kids who are in the same situation we were in." The room fell quiet as the sisters absorbed her words. Zuri, who was often the quiet observer but always had a sharp mind for ideas, cleared her throat. "What if we start a foundation?" she suggested, her voice soft but full of conviction. "One that supports foster kids, especially kids from underserved communities. We could provide mentorship, scholarships, resources, everything that we were lucky to have because of Dad." The idea hung in the air for a moment, and then Jasmine smiled, a light dawning in her eyes. "The William Smith Foundation," she said slowly, testing the name on her lips. "It would be his legacy, a way for him to keep changing lives, just like he changed ours." A wave of excitement rippled through the room. The sisters' faces lit up, their minds racing as they began to flesh out the details. They brainstormed late into the night, talking through ideas for programs, discussing partnerships they could form, and thinking of ways to raise funds. They imagined mentorship programs that would connect foster kids with adults who could guide them, just as Will had guided them. They envisioned scholarships that would open doors for kids who might otherwise have no chance at higher education. Naomi, always the planner, started making notes. "We could also offer workshops," she said, "life skills, college prep, financial literacy, stuff that most foster kids don't get but really need." Maya, the youngest and most creative, chimed in next. "And we should tell real stories, kids who've gone through the system and succeeded. We can highlight their journeys to inspire others. That's what Dad did for us. He showed us that we could rise above the circumstances we were born into." As the hours passed, the sisters continued to refine their plan, their passion fueling their every word. The more they talked, the more determined they became to make this foundation a reality. They knew that their father's story, his selfless love, and his unwavering dedication deserved to be shared, and through the foundation, that story would live on, impacting countless lives. By the time the clock ticked past midnight, the vision for the William Smith Foundation was crystal clear in all their minds. They had settled on their mission to provide foster children with the same love, stability, and opportunities that Will had given them. The foundation would be a beacon of hope for kids who felt lost or abandoned, showing them that they, too, could have a future filled with possibility. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, a tired but satisfied smile playing on her lips. "It's perfect," she said, glancing around at her sisters, all of whom looked just as exhausted but equally proud. "Dad's going to love this," Tiana grinned. "He won't know what hit him," she said, already imagining the look of surprise on their father's face when they finally unveiled the foundation. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. The sisters threw themselves into the project with everything they had, each of them playing to their strengths. Jasmine and Zuri worked on securing funding, tapping into their professional networks, and leveraging the resources they had built over the years. Tiana handled the legal side of things, making sure the foundation was set up properly and aligned with all regulations. Naomi and Maya focused on the creative aspects, designing the foundation's branding and coming up with ideas for its first big launch event. There were late nights spent poring over documents, meetings with potential donors, and endless phone calls to finalize details. But through it all, they kept the secret from Will. It wasn't easy. He was naturally curious, and he'd begun to notice how busy his daughters had become. They made excuses, telling him they were working on a new family project, but never offering any details. Will, trusting his daughters completely, didn't push for answers. Despite the challenges of keeping the secret, the sisters knew that the surprise would be worth it. They envisioned the moment when they would reveal everything to their father. The look of pride and love on his face, the joy in his eyes when he realized just how much they wanted to honor him. As the day of the launch event approached, the sisters felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. They had poured their hearts and souls into this project, and now it was almost time to share it with the world, and most importantly, with the man who had inspired it all. And so, on the eve of the foundation's launch, the six sisters sat together once more, this time in quiet reflection. The journey to this moment had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been deeply rewarding. They had worked together, just as they had as children, and now they were about to show the world what their father's love had created. As Jasmine raised a glass, a soft smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "To Dad," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And to everything he's done for us. The sisters clinked their glasses together, their hearts full of pride and love. Tomorrow, they would unveil the foundation to the world and to the man who had made it all possible. The day of the foundation's launch had finally arrived. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the city as it reflected off the tall buildings. The venue chosen for the event was stunning, an elegant rooftop space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the skyline. Everything was perfect, but Will felt out of place. He wasn't used to this kind of luxury, and the excitement buzzing around him only added to his confusion. Will was still recovering from his surgery. His body felt heavier than it used to, and he leaned on his cane as his daughters guided him through the entrance. Jasmine and Tiana flanked him on either side, both dressed in sophisticated outfits that made them look every bit the successful women they had become. Zuri walked just ahead, making sure the path was clear for her father, while the younger girls whispered excitedly behind them, their voices carrying a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. "Why all the fuss?" Will asked, his brow furrowing as they approached the venue's entrance. "You didn't tell me what this event was for." Tiana smiled, squeezing his arm gently. "We told you, Dad. It's a family event. You'll see soon enough." Will wasn't convinced, but he trusted his daughters. Over the years, they had proven time and time again that they knew what was best for him, just as he had done for them when they were younger. Still, there was a feeling in the pit of his stomach, a combination of nerves and curiosity. Something wasn't quite adding up. As they stepped through the large glass doors, Will was immediately greeted by the sight of a large crowd gathered in the open-air space. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged, facing a raised stage adorned with flowers and a sleek podium. Around the perimeter of the venue were banners, each emblazoned with the words William Smith Foundation in bold, elegant lettering. Photographers snapped pictures, capturing the guests, mingling beneath strings of fairy lights that twinkled in the early evening sky. Will stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening as he scanned the scene. What is this?" he asked, his voice catching in his throat. Jasmine, noticing the way his face had paled, quickly stepped in front of him. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Dad, it's for you," she said, her voice gentle but full of emotion. "Everything you've done for us. We wanted to make sure your legacy lives on." Will blinked, still struggling to comprehend the moment. "Legacy?" he repeated, his voice shaky. He looked from Jasmine to Tiana, then back at the other girls, all of whom were watching him with the same look of love and pride in their eyes. "What are you talking about?" Tiana stepped forward now, her usual fiery demeanor softened. "You saved us, Dad," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "You gave us a family when we didn't have one. You gave us everything. This foundation. It's our way of giving back. The William Smith Foundation is going to help foster kids, just like you helped us." The weight of her words hit Will like a tidal wave. His legs trembled beneath him, and he had to grip his cane harder to steady himself. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision as he looked at the banner again. William Smith Foundation. His name, his story, now a symbol of hope for countless children who were just like his girls. Children who needed a chance, who needed love, who needed someone to believe in them. His throat tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. His eyes darted from one daughter to the next, each of them standing there, their faces filled with pride and anticipation. How had he deserved this? How had he earned this level of devotion, of love? I don't deserve this," Will finally whispered, his voice breaking as he choked back a sob. He felt overwhelmed, the emotions too much to contain. "I just did what any father would do. I didn't expect anything in return." Zuri, always the quiet, reflective one, stepped forward and gently took her father's hand. Her eyes were full of warmth, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You deserve all of this, Dad," she said softly, her words filled with conviction. "You gave us everything when no one else would. Now it's our turn to give back to you." The crowd around them began to applaud, a wave of support and admiration washing over Will as he stood there, still struggling to process what was happening. His daughters, his beautiful, strong, brilliant daughters, had grown into the kind of women he had always hoped they would become. And now they were honoring him in a way that went beyond anything he had ever imagined. As the applause grew louder, Will felt his heart swell with pride. The tears flowed freely now, unchecked, as he embraced each of his daughters, pulling them into a tight hug. They were his legacy. They were the living proof of everything he had worked for, every sacrifice he had made. And now, through the foundation they had created in his name, that legacy would live on for generations to come. After the emotional embrace, Jasmine took the stage, her voice calm but filled with pride as she addressed the gathered crowd. She spoke about their father's journey, about how he had taken in 6 young girls who had been abandoned and unwanted. She spoke about his strength, his kindness, and his unwavering commitment to their happiness and success. And she shared how the William Smith Foundation would carry on his legacy by helping foster children receive the support and opportunities they needed to thrive. As Jasmine spoke, Will watched from the side, his heart swelling with pride. The crowd hung on her every word, their faces reflecting the impact of her message. Will could see it. These people weren't just attending an event, they were part of something bigger. They were part of a movement, one that would change lives, just as he had changed his daughters. When Jasmine finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause once more. Will could hardly believe it. He, a simple police officer who had never sought recognition or reward, was now being honored in such a grand way. He had always considered his work as a father to be a privilege, not a burden. Yet here he was, surrounded by people who admired him for what he had done, and for the love he had given so selflessly. The evening continued, with speeches, presentations, and heartfelt moments shared among the guests. The foundation's vision was clear, and the energy in the room was electric. Will's daughters were at the center of it all, speaking passionately about their plans for the future and the lives they hoped to touch through the foundation. As the night drew to a close, Will found a quiet corner to sit and reflect. The cool night air brushed against his face as he looked out over the city skyline, the twinkling lights below mirroring the stars in the sky above. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the decision he had made all those years ago to take in 6 little girls, and the countless moments since then that had shaped their lives together. He thought about the challenges, the fears, the heartache, but most of all, he thought about the love that had carried them through the darkest days, the love that had bound them together as a family, stronger than blood, stronger than anything the world could throw at them. And now that love was being passed on to others through the William Smith Foundation. His legacy wasn't just in his daughters. It was in every child the foundation would help, every life it would change. As Will sat there, his heart full, he knew one thing for certain. Love was, and always would be, the greatest legacy of all. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of love, sacrifice, and family. Will Smith's story reminds us that the bonds we create with those we care for are what truly shape our lives. His daughter's tribute to him through the William Smith Foundation is a beautiful testament to the power of love and resilience, no matter the challenges. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to Hopeful Horizon for more inspiring stories, and remember, family is where the heart is. Stay hopeful.